The crypto markets are in turmoil. Many altcoins are down over 30% in the last week. Bitcoin only dropping modestly thus far as I'm recording this. Of course, this all comes in the aftermath of the lawsuits issued by the SEC to the two largest cryptocurrency exchanges, Binance and Coinbase. In this video, I wanted to share some insights and my thoughts on how I think this is going to play out and what sort of mindset could prove useful as we make decisions in this next phase of the market. My name is Curtis Lucas and you're watching Empire Building. I don't want to spend too much time rehashing the nature and content of the lawsuits issued against Coinbase and Binance. By now, I suspect most of you are fairly well informed. I'm more interested in understanding what has changed in the industry as a result of the actions taken by Gary Gensler and the SEC this week. You know, the longer I've been in this industry and the more I've studied it, the more clearly the concept of incentives have become for me. I mention this because incentives are the most important concept to remember when trying to predict the outcome of complex systems involving different groups with different interests. Charlie Munger once said, "Show me the incentive and I'll show you the outcome." Incentives form the very basis of the security model that backs Bitcoin and every other cryptocurrency in existence. And yes, even governments and institutions are especially subject to incentives. You must consider the incentives of others when making decisions about your own strategy toward your investments in this field. By now, in case you didn't notice, the US government has been no friend to cryptocurrencies. And before the Bitcoin maximalists get too excited and start dancing on the graves of altcoins, consider this. Bitcoin still poses the greatest threat to the established order. Basically, this is Gensler going after the low-hanging fruit. And he has merely acknowledged that the SEC has no jurisdiction over Bitcoin because it is clearly not a security. And they know that they stand no chance of convincing the court otherwise. Having said that, the SEC is simply a branch of the government with commissioners appointed by the president. Just because the SEC isn't coming after Bitcoin, it doesn't mean other government regulators won't be in some fashion. They have already tried and they will likely try again. All this is to say that the US government has the most to lose if crypto succeeds. These leaders are acting in what they believe to be their best interests today. But in politics, money isn't the greatest incentive. Power is.
Money is the McMansion in Sarasota that starts falling apart after 10 years. Power is the old stone building that stands for centuries. I cannot respect someone who doesn't see the difference.
Gary is making a move to claim authority over as large a percentage of the crypto markets as he thinks he can get away with. You see, I've listened to Gary Gensler speak and I've listened to his entire MIT blockchain course on YouTube. He clearly understands the technical aspects and the potential the technology presents. But today, he's changed his tune. The explanation is obvious. The thing is, not everyone in the government is in lockstep with this.
You say the crypto market is rife with non-compliance. However, existing SEC rules make no sense for blockchain-based companies, and following them would actually kill these businesses. Your regulatory style lacks flexibility and nuance, and as a result, you've been an incompetent cop on the beat.
Remember that in politics, the incentives revolve around power, and that power is ultimately granted by the voters. The question will come down to how many voters can be persuaded that one thing or the other is in the best interest of the country moving forward. Now, if I'm not careful, I'm going to get drawn down never-ending tangents. So for now, I think it's worth noting that the public is waking up to the fact that their money and their financial system isn't exactly what they thought it was. More people are starting to question that system as they come to realize that their money in their bank isn't actually theirs, and it could be taken if the bank goes bankrupt. They've witnessed the central bank print trillions out of thin air and then inflation rise to levels not seen in 40 years. There are so many factors at play, and it isn't possible to predict exactly what's going to happen, but it is those incentives that will help reveal the possible outcomes. The United States is in a rather difficult position. They have the privilege of controlling the world's reserve currency, which carries with it enormous power. For this reason, it is completely obvious that a technology that provides individuals with the ability to circumvent some of that power and control would not be provided fertile ground. But it's a catch-22, because other nations and governments around the world have more to gain than they have to lose, so they benefit by attracting businesses to move to their shores and will get to play a larger role in shaping the framework of this industry as it grows. Sooner or later, those realities will start to set in with the US government, and the perceived incentives will shift. But there's a larger problem here. And this is where I run the risk of falling right off the rails, but bear with me. The message being delivered by Gary Gensler, or at least the message being received, is that all of crypto except Bitcoin is an unregistered security, and therefore Coinbase and any other exchange would have no business offering them for trading. He says that this is the most non-compliant industry he has ever seen, and he is right. But that's a feature, not a bug. That was not an accident. That was done with intent. The very nature of Bitcoin and crypto is that you don't need permission. Even if the courts and the government choose to side with Gensler, the industry, for the most part, would be unwilling or even unable to come into compliance as Gary has demanded. All this means is that they will be turning every U.S. citizen who engages in crypto markets into a criminal. Over the last year, in my pursuit to better understand the game theory around incentives, I came to study and listen to a lot of Milton Friedman, a Nobel Prize-winning economist who did much of his prominent work during the 1970s and 80s. This is what he had to say on the matter of bad laws enacted by governments.
If you have bad laws, you create a situation in which it is socially virtuous for people to break it. And this, in turn, breaks down respect for laws in general and plays a not negligible factor, in my opinion, in the decline in the attitude toward law obedience and morality in recent decades.
As an outsider looking in, I see more and more laws that could be viewed as socially virtuous to break being passed all over the United States. And if Gary gets his way, then I know people would absolutely break it. I don't know if it could possibly go that far, but the stakes are high enough that they could at some point feel that they don't have a choice. Of course, this is where we run the risk of following this train of thought to a very dark place. Late stage empire decline. All the symptoms of a late stage empire are in full effect in the United States, but one could argue that most places around the world are in a similar situation. I could spend many videos on this topic, and indeed many books have been published on the topic. I personally recommend Principles for Dealing with the Changing World Order by Ray Dalio, if you really want to dig into that further. I'm certainly not saying that this is the time to build a bunker and break out the iodine tablets, but it's worth noting that these cycles have played out over and over again throughout human history, and it always ends the same way. A new world order emerges. For now, I'm not betting on that outcome, but I'm paying attention to those signals. So, what can you do about it? I wish I could say it's as simple as voting the right person in. That certainly could work, but there's no guarantee your favorite crypto candidate succeeds, and if they do, there's still no guarantee that they follow through on their word. Milton had something to say about this as well.
People have a great misconception in this way. They think the way you solve things is by electing the right people. It's nice to elect the right people, but that isn't the way you solve things. The way you solve things is by making it politically profitable for the wrong people to do the right things.
This means that elected officials need to understand that the only way they'll get elected to office and stay in office is if they foster a more fertile ground in the U.S. for crypto companies to set up here. There's no question that concessions will need to be made along the way, but when you give it enough time and you let it play out, you begin to realize that all these incentives lead to one place. And that place is not one in which Bitcoin and crypto is dead and replaced by government-issued CBDCs. Like most things, we'll find ourselves somewhere in the middle. At the very least, I believe that compliance in crypto will not bear the same burden it does in traditional finance. It will be one way that we can reclaim some of that freedom to choose that we have lost throughout the years. The big question will be, how much of a role will the U.S. play in shaping this new frontier? One more thing. In case you were wondering what the deal was with this old guy from the 70s, if you're not familiar with him, then let me be the first to tell you that this man was the guy who predicted Bitcoin would eventually be invented back in 1999.
So that I think that the internet is going to be one of the major forces for reducing the role of government. The one thing that's missing, but that will soon be developed, is a reliable e-cash, a method whereby on the internet you can transfer funds from A to B without A knowing B or B knowing A. The way in which I can take a $20 bill and hand it over to you, and there's no record of where it came from. And you may get that without knowing who I am. That kind of thing will develop on the internet, and that will make it even easier for people to use the internet. Of course, it has its negative side. It means that the gangsters, the people who are engaged in illegal transactions will also have an easier way to carry on their business. But I think that the tendency to make it harder to collect taxes will be a very important positive effect of the internet.
He was also an advisor to multiple presidents and produced a series of videos based on his book Freedom to Choose, where he explains libertarian principles and the role of government in free markets. If you enjoyed these videos, then let me know and I'll share more in future videos that I put out. He was a libertarian, which forms the basis of what Bitcoin was founded in. One more item of housekeeping. I've got an interview planned later this week with Sue Ennis of Hut 8. So be sure to tune in for that, and feel free to leave me any questions you might have that you'd like to have answered down in the comments below. That's all for this one. Now let's get back to empire building.